Exciting to have people here. So thank you all for joining. This is actually we wanted to have this right away after the passage of the federal government Service Delivery Improvement Act. So we're excited to talk a little bit about that. But I mean, really, if you look at what has been coming out of in the last couple of weeks, we have had just this bevy of good for government legislation and policies that are pouring out right now, right? We've got this the Government Service Delivery Improvement Act. We've got the Federal Agency Performance Act that was just passed, kind of a little update to GIPRA. We've got an OMB memo on the phase 2 of the implementation of the Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act. OPM updated the SES Executive Core qualifications with some really good stuff. So like there's a bunch of stuff coming out. So it's interesting to think about how all of that can tie together so that we can move forward in a lot of this this CX work really as we go into this next administration. So Lee.
Thank you, Crystal. Couldn't agree with you more. I mean, what a special time. And I, really want to welcome everyone, as well as, having the honor to be co-chairing with Crystal as the government chair, myself as the industry chair, and with an amazing group of leaders. Really want to thank first ACT-IAC, right, for all their sponsorship and support, bipartisan work around moving this forward. The Customer Experience COI, I see many familiar names and that are here, and many that I know has said that they can't come maybe today live, but they'll watch a recording. But really, thank you for bringing us all together for this important conversation. The work this community has done to elevate CX across government, and frankly, to really helps kickstart and really help make things more efficient and more effective in the service delivery of government, has been truly incredible. We see real impact, and we'll talk about this today and how this all connects with the recent law and the changes and all the great work and efforts that Crystal is highlighting. We're here to talk about how Government Service Delivery Improvement Act can shape the future of CX, and what it means, why it matters to you, and how you all, every one of us, are part of this call to action. So to guide us through this conversation, without further ado, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce Martha Dorris, who has multiple roles and titles. She is, of course, the one that actually helped found the COI a number of years ago. Had a chance to work with her while in government, and it's been an honor to work with her and others of the team here. She's also the founder of DCI, and she PSLA, and I'm going to shout out that if you have any nominees for Service of Decision, please put it in. It's a great example of incredible work being done to drive improving service delivery. And I would say, Martha, you've literally been the one, decades ago, saying how important this work is. And I know you're so proud. We're so proud to see this progress. And how do we take this to the next level? So, Martha, over to you.
Had said such good things too. I said it's, we Crystal laid out a bunch of the of what's happened in the last few days, and I would say hold on to your seats, because maybe we haven't seen anything yet. From next week, we'll have a lot more stuff to follow. But it is a real honor to be here today, and I think the beauty of this is that we're trying to be really responsive to a lot of the questions and concerns or uncertainties, or even just how-tos, right, in going forward. And how do agencies think about, implement, use the Government Service Delivery Improvement Act? And we know that the government has built a lot of capabilities and capacities over the past 8 years. And I think what we want to do here today is really remind everybody and just bring it fresh into your mind about where we are, what was started during the previous Trump administration, so that we can help move them forward as they take on these new roles next week. So we're going to have, you heard from Lee. He's the Senior Vice President, Public Sector Practice at Medallia and the Industry Co-Chair of the CX COI. Crystal Philcox, who you heard from, Assistant Commissioner for Travel, Transportation and Logistics at General Services Administration within the Federal Acquisition Service. Amanda Chavez, Vice President for Customer Experience at NuAxis and the Industry Vice Chair for the COI. Dominic, who is the Managing Director for the Government Experience Practice at Code and Theory and the Customer Experience COI Program Committee Chair. And then we have Eris McCautry-Gill from Deloitte. Previously, everybody knows her from her days at the VA and leading their employee experience work. She's our industry co-chair for the Employee Experience Working Group of the CX COI. So I think without further ado, let's just get started and begin with Lee. And Lee, you were in the government as the last Trump administration began. Why don't you give us the highlights of what was begun during that administration and how we can, how agencies and industry can actually leverage that going forward?
Thank you, Martha. It's my honor to talk about this. I mean, I think it's a really great point of how this work has really evolved over many years, and so much great work that agencies have been doing, and really to focus around this work. I think it's important for us to be grounded to know, and many of us may know who have been very involved, and many of you have, and those that will be listening as well have been very involved. It's very clear the first customer experience cross-agency priority goal under a president's management agenda was under the first Trump administration. And I think it's very important for us to really ground in that, in the sense of what that happened. Now, the question maybe is, why did that happen? We could go into more details of that, but really, in short, CX is a business discipline. It's the how to drive efficient, effective service delivery. Full stop. So this was a critical piece, as part of that agency priority goal. And a major shout out, I know, goes to Amira and her team who worked at that time. The VA was a co-lead for this goal with GSA and USDA. Dr. Linda Davis, who was there the first Trump administration, Barbara Morton, Eris, myself, we were part of it, the whole team at VEO. I see some VEO members like Matt and others on the call. Jason, you all were part of it, right? And Simca, Tamika, the work at USDA and GSA, great work that they're currently there and past who have left, were all part of this important effort. As such, as part of the PMA, it's important to remember in A11, which is the budgetary guidance of the government, in Section 280, the very first time under the first Trump administration, we actually had CX guidance. We had the how of how we should go about doing it. It was V1, and it was a really good V1. In there, important to note, was mentioned the high impact service providers. And that's also something that the Service Delivery Act talks about, and we'll go into a little bit more. But the HISPs were identified as the key agencies in that Section 280, in that guidance. In there, we talked about action planning. So the work around action planning, how do you turn insights into real improvement? How do you actually deliver services? The work of the Office of American Innovation. I mean, many may have forgotten, but the Office of American Innovation work was a lot of the work around the digital experience and all those elements started under the first Trump administration. That was a critical element and a critical driver. And we had a great partnership with that team. And as we think about innovation around how do you galvanize the agency, the people of the agency, the public servants, and do the job, how to be able to galvanize them was a critical piece. And I know we'll talk more about the employee aspect, how it's connected. The GSA Centers of Excellence, how that helped agencies build the CX and digital capabilities. So you think about a lot of the work at USDA, at HUD, and others. Kudos goes to the Center of Excellences. That was a critical piece as part of the last Trump administration. The strategy, as we talk about a CX strategist, so we talk about the importance of the employee piece. We actually developed the very first CX strategist. It was a cross-agency work that was happening across, where it was like, what are the skill sets that we need to actually drive this work? That was under also the first Trump administration. And of course, a lot of that work, great work, carried through. And the pieces around how do we make sure that employees, right, are critical pieces. We talk about, transformation. It's people, process, technology, right? How are the people? How do we make sure that we're addressing that? Because the reality is, what we found was that when services were not delivered very well, right, Martha and the team, we found that oftentimes the employees had a policy, an old policy that may have been a barrier, or a technology that held them back, or a certain process that you ask them, why are you doing it this way? Oh, we've always done it that way. But the culture of the organization was like, you got to do it that way. So it was inefficient. So oftentimes the barriers, it's not because the employees don't want to do it. It's because maybe there's some other elements. So this, Martha, I mean, to answer your question, this work, this body of work, and I could go on because there's more, but this is, I would say, that helped, I would say, foundationally put in place this great work. And if you look at the Service Delivery Act, there's pieces that are connected to it, because we started working on this legislation work back in 2018 under the first Trump administration. And also of note, the executive order that was actually, we had the drafted. So we at OMB and VA and GSA and USDA, we actually drafted that executive order before the next Biden administration. We did that actually under the Trump administration, which also of note, service delivery was also in the title too.
Thank you, Lee. I wanted to open it up just quickly to the rest of the group and just see if any of you all had anything you wanted to add about what Lee had to say. I mean, I think it was, for me, when I started looking back and doing the research and really reflecting on that time. I don't know, Lee, did you mention the GSA, the Centers of Excellence?
I did only the CX though, not the contact center one. I think, Martha, maybe because that's a critical piece for service delivery. So, and
yeah, I think with the Office of American Innovation and the creation of those centers of excellence, it was yet another way of institutionalizing it within the government infrastructure and agencies. And of course, the first agency was USDA, followed by HUD, and then a few other agencies. And there's other centers of excellence involved as well. But anyway, I just wanted to open it up and see if anybody else had anything they wanted to like double down on here.
I can jump in. I will just start really quickly. Thank you. What Lee shared about some of the things that started back in 2019 in particular under the leadership of Dr. Davis, as Lee mentioned. But I also want to give a plug to Dan Sitterly, who was the ASHRA at VA at the time. And one of the things that I really appreciated about the approach, particularly when we started thinking about how does CX evolve, given that we had gained some traction at that time, and looking at how the employee experience impacted the customer experience and seeing the integration and the need for integration between both the CX office and the mission support offices such as HRA. And so I just wanted to flag the internal collaboration that is necessary. Sometimes we think about an office or a function needing to live in one particular space, and that may very well be true, but I will say there was also a recognition of the impact that exists and that can happen when you see both internal cross collaboration, but also across government, and how can we learn and start to leverage the best practices and the lessons learned in this space from both.
Thanks, Eris. Dominic?
Yeah, I mean, if the question here is whether CX is going to go away or whether the Trump administration is going to like stop all the progress we've made, I mean, I've been around long enough to see over several administrations, there's been a natural progression of the importance of service delivery. I think this act, this law is a cap. It's a clear inflection point that we've changed from a period of government as a monopoly that hasn't had to compete with private industry, with other industries, where it's always been unquestioned. So we focus more on the what we're delivering in programs. And it's increasingly important to building trust with Americans and everyone and our employees and our industry to really focus on the how. How do we make people feel when they interact with us? So I think this Service Delivery Act is a good compromise on getting us there, but it's also really a demonstration that the whole conversation on the management of government has changed. And so, yeah, I agree with all that. This is not going away. We'll have to change the way we talk about things. We'll maybe focus on this thing versus that. But overall, I'm really excited about where this act takes us and where this CX movement is going.
So 2 points that came to mind as you guys were talking. And one is, and it's my fault because I didn't have it in the notes, 21st Century Integrated Digital Experience Act was actually passed by President-elect Trump. And so that also takes us not just from customer experience, the discipline, end-to-end journey kind of thing, but it also helps to prioritize the digital experience piece, which we know we had a new memo about, recently on delivering a digital first public experience. So that little gap was also filled in by the Trump administration. And then lastly, before we go over to Crystal, I just would really urge everybody, as you're talking about customer experience to incoming leadership and political appointees, that you don't throw out CX, 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 because they're going to think about the last time they were at Disney or the Ritz-Carlton, and not necessarily, because this is a whole new crowd of people, right? And to keep in mind that they did not pass this law that they're getting handed to them when they go in there. They're gonna have to be educated on what the benefits and the value is of the work that's been done around customer experience, and the how that you get to creating these efficient and effective government services. And I know I sound like a broken record, but I guess I have I can do it. I got the microphone, right? So anyway, I'm going to go over to Crystal now, because we've talked about, setting the stage. I guess the latest thing is we've set the table, right, about what's coming next. And so, Crystal, can you give us about the highlights of the new Government Service Delivery Improvement Act?
Yeah, so this is actually a kind of a follow-on, I think, to Dom's point here, that that it's a little bit more about the how, right? That we're really leaning into, and that's what we've got codified here. So really exciting. It's starting to focus on there's a couple of things that are embedded in that act, right? One is that that OMB will have to identify a federal government service delivery lead. And that person will be responsible for developing government-wide standards, policies, guidelines, there's a couple of things that are really interesting here, to, first of all, understand the needs of individuals, businesses, and organizations, also to solicit and consider feedback, to assess delivery processes, and then it talks about actual metrics that are in the law, right? That this person is required to consider ease, efficiency, transparency, accessibility, fairness, burden, and duration, meaning delivery times, like how long it takes, including wait times and all of that sort of thing. So it also does a few other things. That encourages the use of commercial products and services. It requires people to report qualitative and quantitative data. It requires this lead at OMB to evaluate the quality of service delivery, identify best practices, ensure that these service delivery initiatives are identified in budget justifications, and which is, this is a little different, I think, for some agencies, because some authorizing language for certain agencies don't say they're supposed to provide customer service at all, right? They just do it because it makes everything else easier. And that is true for a number of agencies. There's no, so when if budgets are getting cut, what gets cut is what's not codified, right? So this gives a little bit more oomph to agencies who don't have kind of customer service codified into their practices. It also gives responsibility for a service delivery official at every agency, and has that person reporting to the head of the agency or the deputy, and specifies that they're supposed to have operational authority over service delivery, right? So it's not going to, there's a couple versions of what that might look like, but the law requires that they do have operational authority over service delivery. Can't be someone sort of stuck in the corner doing something else. The agencies are also required to improve and enhance service delivery and the service delivery channels, collect and report data. They're supposed to coordinate with OMB and among other agencies, as well as include their work, which is interesting, in strategic plans and performance plans. So, it's getting into, right, the fabric of how we run government, which is really important to help drive it. So also a couple of other things like, you know, a GAO report within 2 years, an OMB report within 1 year, that includes reporting on the usefulness of those metrics that I just mentioned. Agency reports to Congress within a year. So really interesting stuff, I think, that we see coming out in this new law. And then it also sort of dovetails, right, with this new Federal Agency Performance Act, which also requires, you know, reviews of progress towards strategic goals and objectives. It talks about identifying whether additional evidence is necessary in order to assess or reach a goal, which is really interesting for CX, I think. It also talks about you know, codifying the assignment of priority goal leaders. So it's starting to, you know, codify some of the work that they've been doing with PMA, with all of the planning and the strategic planning that agencies are doing. And then you've got this OMB memo on evidence-based policymaking that is so focused on open data and ensuring that agency data sets are listed on websites, that they're sharing data among agencies, that they're creating a federal data catalog, that every agency has an open data plan. So just feeding this opportunity to do evidence-based assessments of service delivery, right? So really exciting stuff coming out, I think.
Thanks, Crystal. Couple things. I think it's really important to point out also that the person within the agency, the designated or appointed, right? So that's, I'll reiterate, there's been some articles that have come out that sort of infer that these are going to be new political appointees. The language does say for both the OMB person, the government-wide person, and the agency that they can be designated or appointed. So I don't think that's you know, showing some flexibility, and I think we believe that agencies can implement this in a different way, and we'll differently across agencies, and we're going to get into that a little bit, and that this person, you know, does report to either the deputy or the head of the agency, which is what we've been like begging for in the customer experience space for a long time. So while it muddies the water a little bit on the governance structures that are currently in place, it also could clarify it in a little, depending on how the agencies implement it. Again, anybody have any other comments? I think we're going to go over to Dominic right now and just, you know, Crystal, did you have something else to?
I was just going to say that your point about the you know, making sure it reports to an agency head or deputy. One of the things that we heard from the Government Advisory Board when we met with them last was, hey, can you help us convince our leaders that this is really important? And so, you know, now we've got someone positioned in agencies that can help do that.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it can help a lot of different organizations and functions get to where they've been wanting to go. Back to Dominic. You know, you've spent years at GSA and at OMB, and we wanted to get you to give us your insights on how you think agencies will be implementing this, and how it normally works within like the OMB process, and same with agencies.
Well, let me start by saying I'm always skeptical about laws required to tell government how to do something. That chafes a little bit from having been in OMB. It kind of cuts across that authority, you know, of agencies and the administration managing as they see fit. It's often a sign that maybe Congress isn't happy with what's going on. In this case, I feel like it's very much benign. You know, no one's going to go to jail if this, you know, if they don't meet the requirements of this bill. There's no Congress jail. The government's going to do what the government wants to do. I think what it does, though, is it sets a marker for us to say, okay, this is the new way we're thinking about managing government. I do like the flexibilities in here that allow for agencies to kind of pick and choose how they implement. It's not overly prescriptive like some other federal government management bills we've seen. So I would say overall, I would give it, I don't know if I give any bill on how to manage government an A, but I give a strong B plus. I think there are some interesting things that are missing. We talked about customer experience a lot. This is the customer experience group. I don't think either word, definitely experience is in there. I don't think customer is in there, but that's okay because we know we're talking about the same stuff. It's all in the same family. Having come from OMB and GSA, I have very much a government-wide view. So there's a lot of talk about agencies, how agencies do things, how we run programs. I don't want to miss the opportunity now. We've got the technology. With strong leadership, we can really figure out how to do things across government, drive some standardization of technologies, practices, look and feel. We don't have to reinvent the wheel across the board. I don't see a lot in here that really presses on that, although that position in OMB could really be used for that. And of course, we don't see any pressure on Congress's end here, right? Executive branch can only do as much as Congress is able to give us the money, the flexibility, remove unnecessary. I think Lee touched on some laws, some boundaries, some hurdles that make it difficult to implement, especially digital. So, I urge Congress to look at itself and see how it can enable the executive branch to enact some of these things. So those are just some of my thoughts. I think it's great. It's definitely moving things in the right direction. And I'm excited if it lights a fire under a few people who maybe already didn't think this was important. That's wonderful.
Thanks, Dominic. I think we also need to make sure we mention that it does specifically say no new funding in the law. So as agencies are looking at how they currently do business, I mean, getting rid of things that are unnecessary or consolidating or saving is one of the hardest things.
It might say no new funding to support this law. That's not stopping Congress from appropriating smart, more wisely, maybe creating more reimbursable revolving funds so agencies don't have to worry about this appropriation trap we get into every year. So I think it doesn't let Congress off the hook when it comes to funding. But yeah, we shouldn't expect to spend any more to implement this. I agree with that.
Good point. I wanted to open it up to the whole group and see, what do you think? There are definite ties to the work of customer experience, and I think it's been alluded to several times, especially in many cases, it does refer to doing something, but particularly for the high impact service provider. So there is that link too. So Amanda?
So it's really, Dom, you made a couple of really good points that I would piggyback on, but I think both you and Martha brought up too about, the nomenclature, and Lee wrote in the chat about the significance of how words matter. It is really true. And I feel like almost we're going back to, for all of us, on this call who have been probably in the movement since it began, it's kind of like kicking it old school, where we're going back to the before times where we had to bake the broccoli into the brownies, right? Because it's not saying CX specifically and explicitly, but we all know that that's a really important part of the how. I also think what this does that I think could be really amazing, and it's something that Martha has been saying for a long time. It doesn't matter if it's a CX person, in my humble opinion, or the CIO or whomever it is that's in this role. I have been a government contractor for about 20 years now, and I've been on so many projects where I'm funded to fix one part of a problem that has implications for an entire ecosystem. That if you fix this one little thing, it's like putting, it's like the Dutch boy putting his finger in the dam, right? Like it's not going to hold because the rest of the system has inefficiencies and sicknesses in it that need to be addressed. So I don't care who's doing it, and I don't care if, I could live to regret this statement, but I don't care about the nomenclature. I am delighted that somebody is looking over the services at the top in a hope of making that a more coherent experience where people don't fall through the cracks.
Yeah, I would hope that also the person selected at the OMB level actually, I mean, I'm a firm believer in you can't really identify efficiencies, which we know is an important priority, the efficiencies and even the effectiveness side of things if you look at things in your own little silo. And so by looking at it at a government-wide level and then looking at it from an agency level, it becomes really clear if you know what you have, right? And you're looking at it from that perspective. Um, we do have a question in the chat that said, I love this discussion around having these functions report to agency heads. I'd love to hear some discussion on best practices for agency heads who are mostly too busy to join something like this. What do we collectively want them to do for this effort? I could see some power in having a short list of thoughts here. And so I think we're getting some continuation of that in terms of the importance of that. So as we're talking, yeah, I think the agency heads are, the beauty of it is that they're going to probably be hauled into the PMC meetings and asked to report on certain things that are required in this if it actually comes to that implementation. And we know, 21st century idea, it's taken many, many years to implement. So hopefully this moves a little faster. Eris, I think you had something.
Just really quickly, I wanted to pull the thread on something Dom mentioned, and it ties to what you just shared as well. When you think about unfunded requirements and the fact that CX, and I think that's really woven throughout this legislation, it's an organizational imperative. There might be someone who is tapped as the lead from an agency or department perspective, but I think as we've all experienced, CX really flies when we see it adopted and embraced, both in the offices that are delivering services and also in the mission support functions. And so I think as we talk about what resourcing can look and feel like and where agency leads can play into this conversation, part of it is around how do we embed it in a way, again, that doesn't necessarily require an additional infusion of funding or capital, but where can we start to see increases that might be smaller in nature, where we're leveraging the expertise from folks in house or ideas. And again, this is where we get to the importance of the workforce as well, where some of the innovative ideas come from the folks who are living this every day. So I think sometimes it can feel really daunting when you get these legislative mandates that are unfunded, but I think there are ways for us to be creative. And in VEO, we certainly had to do this many times where we got new missions coming in without additional funding associated with them. It almost forces you to start to think about where can we find efficiencies in existing programs, but where can we leverage some of the infrastructure that may be already set up? Thanks,
Eris. Crystal, did you?
Well, Lee may have some of the same thoughts, but the law sort of leans into that too, right? It actually asks agencies to include this in their strategic plans, in their performance plans, in their budget justifications. And so when we're talking about embedding that in agencies and what we want leadership to do, that's what I want leadership to do, right? I want them to do that as well as right, maybe make sure that in those strategic plans and underneath those goals, right, there are actions that are real and tangible, that are actually addressing service delivery, and that they're coordinated at an agency head level, right, in a way that is looking across the agency. So you are creating some service delivery and some CX that is the full experience that their constituents are having as they're interacting with that agency.
Thanks, Crystal.
Can I just add one more thing to Crystal? You just made me think of it. That's one thing about this group, y'all. Whenever we talk, they always just generate such wonderful
ideas. That's the beauty of it. We feed on each other.
That's right. One of the things I think, again, as we're talking about kind of what would we be looking for from leaders is communicating the impact. I know in some of the conversations before, it's yes, we believe CX is necessary, it's needed, but there's been some challenge in being able to quantify what the impact is. And so I think being able to confidently and effectively tell the story of CX, how it impacts upstream, downstream, horizontally within the organization and vertically is really important. And I think something that will help as further discussions happen around the impact of this legislation and what support is needed within organizations to continue to advance it.
Lee, did you have something?
I just I want to share. I don't know if anyone had a chance to watch some of the hearings, nomination hearings, and there's one yesterday was Scott Turner's nomination hearing, the nominee for HUD. First off, I highly recommend those that, if you want to be inspired, I would give it a listen. He talks about his journey, and of course, I don't know if anyone remember, he was an NFL player also for the Washington Redskins Commanders. Of course, they're doing really well right now, but that's great, and hope they continue to do well. But I mean, the piece that was fascinating that they were really kind of leaning in with him was around and the focus that he had, which is really should be telegraphing what this administration is going to be really focusing on, which was frankly how the conversations were happening in the first Trump administration. It's going to be around the impact piece. So, for instance, he was zeroed in around that. How do we know that programs are effective? Like he was really talking about how he's going to looking to analyze that. And if they're because right now we know we have a housing crisis, right? We have 7 million. There's estimates, right? About 7 million houses or more housing that's needed. We know we have a homeless crisis. We know there's been a lot of progress made on reducing veterans homelessness. But broadly, there's a tremendous opportunity. Now we have the LA fires situation. So now LA, we've known there's been a homeless crisis. It's going to be even more so. So the question becomes is, as and he was talking about this, like how he's going to be focused around the delivery. He's going to be focused, and the challenge that he has and HUD has is they work through grantees, right? They work through grant. They provide funding down, but how do they know that there's impact? How do they know that those programs are actually working? The answer is CX, right? We know that's the how to actually get to that. But the fact that he zeroed in on it. So the question as practitioners, right, as we've been driving this, how are we taking our tradecraft, right, aligning to those mission goals that those agencies have, right? And how do we make sure that we're ensuring that it is efficient, it's effective in delivering said service? So I think that is just a fascinating approach, and I love the conversation here that we're talking. I see the question about around the heads. So, for instance, around having a function report to agency heads, we've seen, and this is the beauty of it, is in the first Trump administration we piloted this, and we piloted this at VA. And then we've seen this also at USDA, and the impact that VA has made, USDA has made, and others. We're seeing so Congress, we got this law, but we've been piloting this for a number of years, which has allowed them to say, okay, this is the way that we need to move forward around it. And I would say is if you are in a role that has been focusing, maybe a CX lead, that you may not be reporting up to the agency heads, right, to the deputy side. I think this is an opportunity for you to make sure. I think there's an opportunity for you to connect the dots here, because they're going to need your services in helping to, because you are the how to drive this in support of the agency's goals that's needed to do.
Thanks, Lee. I'm going to build on that one quick second, and then I'm going to go over to Amanda and then Dominic. But I think as customer experience professionals in agencies are thinking about this, to go into the new leadership and talk about why understanding your customers is important, and why getting feedback from your customers is important, and why building measures to drive service improvements is important, is going to resonate with new leaders, rather than going in and saying CX is important, because in their mind, they're going to say, oh, I got the Diet Coke in my refrigerator at the Ritz-Carlton, because they understood who I was. And so it is, I think it's an imperative on how it's applied in the government space versus how it's applied in the private sector, because of that. And people coming in may not understand it. And we have some examples here. Kathy Muha from Maximus put in, Marco Rubio specifically mentioned customer oriented. The incoming secretary of DHS talked about her number one goal is improving trust. Bingo, right? Anybody across DHS needs to hook into that. She threw us a hook. We need to grab onto it, because, improving service delivery through the use of these business practices is going to help improve trust. So, sorry for the pedestal here. Amanda.
That was great. And honestly, too, I think one of the things that something that Lee said, and I can't retain it past 2 minutes, but something that you said, Lee, made me think about like there's a real opportunity with this because it doesn't have like CX explicitly in it, but we all know that, it's part of the enablement. I think that there's a real opportunity here for other capabilities to be in play here and to have some ownership and responsibility over customer experience because, like I'm at a, technology focused company and we're always seeing, the chasm between like the soft work of CX and the engineers, developers, et cetera, the technical folks who are a big part of, orchestrating really significant touch points. So that's just one example of, if everybody's kind of, united under the same umbrella, perhaps it reduces some of the friction. If it's written into performance plans, perhaps it enables and incentivizes greater collaboration. So to you, Dom.
Yeah, so I talked about what was missing in this, and all this conversation is getting me thinking about, this is it's process oriented, it's a framework, it's great. It's about how do we drive accountability. What I feel is really missing from the conversation, where hopefully new leadership coming in can really focus, is leadership, setting a clear vision of where we should be as a country. We are dabbling in the middle when it comes to comparing ourselves to other countries and e-government, and we keep making excuses why we can't get there instead of saying, why the heck aren't we there? So that's where I'm hoping the conversation changes, and where this community can get the whole government fired up and say we can and should be the best when it comes to these things. So I just, you can't, that's hard to legislate. No law is going to say we should be #1 in e-government, although I wish it had. But that's where I'm hoping the conversation, they take this and run with it and say, all right, enough is enough. Let's figure out how to get there.
Thanks, Dominic. I think we'll shift over. We have less than or a little over 15 minutes to go, and really target the challenges in implementing this this legislation. And Rachel brought up a really good point, which is we have we have CIOs, we have CTOs, we have digital services teams, we have digital experience leads, we have a digital experience council, we have chief customer officers, we have chief data officer. What is the governance going to look like, and how does this dovetail with the digital experience council? We've talked a lot about the roles of each one of these people, and I see the role of this lead in each agency as what my vision of what a chief customer officer could be in terms of setting the direction for service delivery in the entire agency. But it takes a lot of resources and a lot of authority and responsibility, which this act does help us out in. So does anybody have any other thoughts about how do agencies, and how is this going to work itself through? I tend to think it depends on the agency and the maturity of the agency in every one of these roles, and kind of who's bubbled to the top that has more kind of capability, or do they bring somebody new in? And any other challenges in terms of implementing this? I mean, we've identified also the employees are not really spelled out in here specifically. Amanda?
I mean, I think there's a number of potential challenges. I think the biggest one, and Martha, you and I were on a call earlier today where you talked about this change. Like, this is a culture shift. That's really what this is. When you're embedding it into all of these different mechanisms and then having accountability to report on it, that will absolutely shift the culture. That's hard. That's very, very hard to do. That's not like we have Eris here, like who can, would talk about that too. That's not like an overnight transformation. That is years worth of work. I think in addition to, having, just having the burden of a culture shift, I can't help but think that another challenge here, and this is, that one's on the macro level, but this one is incumbent upon a few individuals. My poor friends on the federal side who will have yet another thing to report. Like, I think that that's probably a challenge too, is just having more administrative burden with that. And hopefully some of these initiatives can cross cut and the, you know, the metrics will be complementary, but I think it's an additional burden.
Well, that would be a good recommendation to the incoming administration as you're implementing this, looking at what is currently required through a lot of the other reporting mechanisms and what can be done once. Maybe through the government service delivery chain, as opposed to this one goes over to the eGov office and this one goes over to the CX office, and where does, you know, and it's all the same thing. So,
A
Eris,
plug
did you?
a plug for my friends in TTS who are already doing a lot of these metrics at government scale, right? We've got the digital gov program, the digital analytics, IT dashboard. A lot of, at least the digital stats are already out there. So agencies should not be setting up to collect those. It should look to GSA as an aggregator.
Thanks, Dom.
Yeah,
So-
I would also say one of the challenges is going to be the metrics that Amanda talked about, because they do sort of say that this lead at OMB must consider these metrics, right? And so defining metrics and codifying those, it's not, you know, a once and done. It says they must consider them, but agencies have so many different metrics, right, to try to measure their service delivery, and they like trying to figure out how to measure ease or efficiency or transparency, right? They're going to have to figure out if they have data, what data they might consider for that. Like, right, there's a lot of work to do in terms of if we're going to focus on those specific metrics rather than what agencies will probably do at first was come forward and say, well, these are the metrics we have, right? And then that person is going to have to figure out, okay, how do I sync all this up? And that I think will be challenging.
So I could be wrong, and I'll look to any of you to kind of correct me on this, but I think the ease, efficiency, effective, a lot of these metrics are already in place through A11, right? And the feedback tools and those processes have already been in place for high impact service providers for a lot of them. Maybe not all of them, like the transparency one, but anybody have any thoughts on that?
I do. I think Eris wanted to share first, and I'll go after.
Go, Eris.
No, go ahead, Lee, because I may go into an EX tangent with some additional things. So
Perfect.
Go ahead.
So what I would just say is that I think what this law does for us also, it helps also be a gut check. Are we measuring things that really matter and really move the needle? And also the piece around how do we reimagine how we understand the needs of the public? How do we make sure that we're not just doing this as a kind of research exercise, that we're actually listening in the moment across the entire journey of the services that we're providing to the public? So that means, are we truly harnessing the data from the contact center, right? So we have contact centers that are providing a direct service. Do we know how we're doing there? And are we able to answer the call answer the question the first time? Do we have that? And we have examples, like the VA has been, the White House, it started off the White House hotline back under the Trump administration. Now they've created the VA 411. It's a great example of starting on that journey. USDA has the Ask USDA, a one-stop shop of where you can, and that becomes a place, and I know other agencies are starting that work too. That becomes a place where you're starting to actually listen and understand what the needs of the public are. Frankly, maybe you don't even have to send a survey because you're already listening in that way, right? And there's creative ways in how you can measure in ways where it actually is less of a research, but it's more of an operational piece. And I think this law provides a mandate from a delivery of service perspective, so that we can be more responsive, and dare I say, a government that is able to be anticipatory of needs of citizens that need the services that the government provides. So I think that's a big piece. But I think the employee side is a critical aspect, and I defer to Eris, because that's a piece of because employees have a lot of insights, and they know what's working, what's not working, and more.
100% could not have teed that up better, Lisa. Thank you. And I just want to share a quick data point. When meaningfully engaged, 70% of the workforce better understands how to meet customer needs. And organizations that help people thrive are twice as likely to drive desired service delivery outcomes. And when you put that in the perspective of a production environment, an improved employee experience can boost processing by 20%. So now, y'all know I generally come at this from heart speak, but there is a business imperative to why understanding and recognizing the impact of employee experience, both from investing in the workforce, but downstream to improving service delivery, is critical. And one of the things that I've seen across the federal landscape and in state and local as well is that there isn't a cookie cutter approach to this work. Different agencies have different challenges and are going about it in different ways. And when I was reviewing the legislation, several things that the team has already touched on here around understanding the needs of stakeholders, collecting and reporting quantitative and qualitative information, looking at ease. There's so many things that connect to the workforce. So as Lee just mentioned, employees have a front row seat to understanding some of the pain points that exist with customers and what they'd like to see. And when you think about how critical employee feedback is to things that are happening, like modernization efforts that are happening across government, they are creating, developing, and then implementing these systems so they know what works and what doesn't. When you think about call center operations, as Lee just mentioned, and the IRS comes to mind, where they have employees helping to design the support of the single pane of glass. I think of, I don't know if you all ever watched 24, but like all of the command centers with 10 screens, because they have so many systems that they're trying to navigate to meet a customer need. Okay, well, how about we have one? We make it easier for the team member. It makes it easier and faster for those that we're serving. And so that's a critical piece when we talk about efficiency and effectiveness. We're saving time on both ends, which translates to a cost savings and an improved experience for those that we're serving. And also the discussions around how do we address the administrative and reduce the administrative burden for our team members to streamline operations. And I just want to flag that while retention is not the end all be all or even the objective across government for all operations, it is the focus for some. And particularly when I think about law enforcement agencies or those that are charged with those kinds of missions, there is a focus on how do we not only attract folks in, how do we improve the candidate experience and understand what that's like, but how do we then understand what it takes to keep them? Because in order to meet mission effectively, we need boots on the ground. And so there's a level of understanding that we're seeing and hearing in discussions, because it's expensive to keep replacing folks. It can cost as much as 50 to 200% to backfill a position. And then on top of that, you have the time that it takes to ramp up and learn, which slows down execution of services. So when we have the conversations around the delivery of government services, it behooves us to look at who it is that is providing the services to the public. And then the last thing is, I would be remiss if I didn't touch on the fact that there are a lot of changes coming. Government doesn't stop, and there's a level of anxiety that exists within the workforce. And folks have often heard me say, empathy does not come at the expense of excellence, nor excellence at the expense of empathy. Leaders, I think, have the challenge, amplified the challenge now of how do you create a space for team members to share their concerns, to be vulnerable, to talk about where there are concerns, and also holding them accountable to continue providing those high levels of service to constituents. And so there's I think, a balance that leaders are talking about, and I'm glad that they're talking about and talking about it openly, where we want to create and cultivate healthy environments for our workforce, because we know that when people feel secure, when they feel safe, they are more likely to be innovative. And refer back to that 70% stat about an engaged workforce understanding needs. And so there's a direct connection here between the ability of the workforce to help advance the mandates that are included in this legislation. And even though, Martha, to your earlier question, that's a long way for me to get back around to you. One of the challenges is how do we share and present that piece that I just shared to those who may not understand, or, and when I say understand, it just may not be intuitive to make the connections between this legislation and the impact to the workforce. So I will pause there, because y'all know I'll keep going. And I know
I got to double down on ARIS, like to the folks coming in. If any of you are on here, they are the workforce. They are there to help. They can be super helpful. They want to do the right thing. A lot of people out there are frustrated and they're not saying it. Please give them a chance to show you what they've got, because it's going to be a lot harder without engaging them. If they feel like you don't trust them, they're going to be a resistance. I'm telling you, there's really good people out there who are going to make your agenda 10 times easier to implement if you make them feel like they're part of the solution, not part of the problem.
So I have it put in the chat about asking for ideas, and we have a few ideas on how we can follow up next time. We do have this Zoom for a little longer than 1:30 if people want to stay on for any other questions. But I wanted to go specifically to this question about this delivery lead in each agency and what skills that they need coming in. And I know Lee answered some of it. And the question said they need to have an understanding of HCD, UX, and the value of qualitative evidence. And I'm going to quote Dr. Linda Davis, who said, Lee came to her and said, we need to talk about HCD. And she said, what the heck is HCD? And he said, it's about bringing the users into into our experience. And she's like, why didn't you say that? Like, talk plain language to me. And so I don't believe these people need to know, have a clear understanding. I think they need to know it's important that they have people who understand that. These are high level executives reporting to the head of an agency. They are not going to know how to do HCD or journey map, but they need to know the importance of it and who on their staff understands it and knows how to do it and has those skills. So we're not, we are talking pretty high level people here that are going to need, I agree with Lee about strong business discipline. They're going to need to know how to communicate across their agency and they're going to need, as Gene Bliss would say, the human duct tape, right? Like be able to bring together people across the agency to drive towards these common service delivery goals. So it's not, obviously I'm not the end all be all. So if anybody has other thoughts about it, but they're high level positions. You're going to be reporting up through that secretary to the White House. And everybody on this call has been in those shoes of what that means to be on the hotline for the White House on some of these things. And I need a contact center to answer calls from veterans in 30 days. So this is the kind of things that you get thrown on your plate when you're in a position at that level. So anyway.
You're actually making the point that I wanted to make when you were talking, when you asked the question about the challenges, Martha, because I am so glad you made that point, because I think about that all the time, even with, like the CX roles, where we have agency-wide CX. That, just from what I've observed, the ability to gain traction, for that, taking that effort, it is really based on somebody's ability to do exactly what you said, Martha. Like, who is at the helm that can bring people together? I love what you said about being the human duct tape. That's also a risk too, I think, for this. And that's why I wanted to put it under challenge. If you don't have the right person in this nascent stage, you really have to measure twice to cut once, putting the first folks in these roles, because it will have downstream consequences as to whether or not this is perceived as an effective policy or whether or not it's considered, bunk.
Okay, we're gonna do a lightning round, and the lightning round is: how would you recommend the incoming administration use customer experience practices to create efficient and effective government services? Dominic, why don't we go to you? You're on mute.
I lost focus. I lost you for a second because I was typing something in there responding.
Oh, sorry. I'll go to Lee first and then we'll come back to you. The question is, how would the incoming administration use customer experience practices and strategies to create these efficient and effective government services?
Yeah, so what I would say is simplify, simplify, simplify. Use this as a way to the new administration to reduce bureaucracy, cut the red tape, because it gives you the understanding of the why behind it. When we talk about when we're trying to deliver great services and trying to understand through CX, right? Being able to listen to those that you're serving, you have the ability through that to really understand that it's not just about great service. It's not just about doing more, right? Of course, but it's about making things easier, right? It's about making, you should not have to be a lawyer, a JD, right? To be able to navigate government. Right. And this administration has said this, like they have a true direction from the American people to make government work better for them. It's very clear. There's Americans that have said they've been left behind. Well, guess what? This is the opportunity for us to be able to connect the dots, and so that no one is left behind. And how do you make government as easy? Again, we don't want government should not be intrusive, right? If you need the services of the government should be there ready to go. Like I had a dear mentor of mine. I was bragging to him about the great work we were doing at CX and government. And he said to me, he's like, well, Lee, that's great. Why don't you have them just pick up the phone when I need them to call, when I need to call? So it's oftentimes it just gets to that simplification of what it means to deliver the services that you need to deliver.
Thanks, Lee. I mean, understanding your customer, depending on the services that you provide, can, not only provide better services, create ones that they want and they need, but also prioritize limited investments, right? So put your money where people really, you're going to get the most bang for your buck. So, Eris, why don't we go over to you?
You took the words right out of my mouth. I often follow the Martha model, and this is no exception. So what immediately came to mind is to listen and challenge assumptions. I think that's one of the best things about CX is to making sure that the right problem is being addressed, the ones that are the most acute pain points or areas that folks are looking to have resolved. And again, perception is reality. And I think one of the biggest parts of CX around elevating the voice of the customer and understanding from team members and validating that information against what team members are experiencing really creates a powerful mechanism to start to create a different narrative around government services.
Thanks, Eris. Crystal, I'm giving you time to think, Dominic.
It's there, Mark.
Write it down. I'm just kidding.
Yeah. So in terms of, what are we going to ask these folks to do or think about? So I just want to reiterate what you said, Martha. We will have, and I think Lee too, we'll have folks walking in the door that have zero government experience. I mean, we know that. We know that that's coming Monday. And so, they're going to be questioning everything. Long-standing budget policies, long-standing procurement policies, right? Why do we do this? Why are we doing this? Why don't we just do it this other way, right?
The 5 whys.
I mean, that is going to happen a lot next week, I can guarantee you. And so using those questions, right, to be ready for those and use those questions to identify what you think might be barriers, right? So maybe we can't, change the entire way we do federal budgeting, but maybe there's something about the way that we do that you're like, wow, this is a real barrier for service delivery. And can we identify a tweak here, a tweak there that can really help, and throw those out and give them some quick wins. That's what I would say.
Thanks, Crystal. Amanda.
So I think, I hope other people have had this experience. I'm in probably a situation that many can relate to, where I have 2 sets of parents who are in need of care. And so I want to personally thank, if anybody on this call is part of CMS, I just want to write you a love letter, and please consider it this. I have had the best experience working with Medicare. I mean, it is so seamless. It is so easy to access. And it's so emotional going through setting up care for your beloved family members. It's like the worst. And dealing with private sector folks, like in insurance and providers, et cetera, that has been more fraught than working with Medicare. So that's a beautiful example of tying together services out of silos and coordinating it so that it is seamless for somebody going through a process that they know nothing about. So that is what I would emphasize. If I had my wish list, that would be it, that we're working across silos like this legislation is proposing.
Well, and that's one of the beauties of implementing these ways of doing business around customer experience, right? Like you're bringing together all the parties that need to come together to be able, and you can see from your what your experience and how much we can change the lives of citizens, Americans, everyone in the way that we deliver services. Dominic, take us home.
See how I engineered it so I had the last word, Martha?
You don't have the last word.
I mean, in this. So if the election showed us one thing, it's that people are so fed up. Their trust has dropped so much. They're ready to just blow up the whole system, right? People are fed up. We're not delivering what people are expecting. Sure, government service delivery is just one aspect of it, but it is a big aspect. If you're already upset and you have a bad interaction with government, it's the compounding that. It's making the problem worse. What we have the opportunity now to turn that around, to create trust as our core metric. I like whoever brought that up before. That is what this is all about, rebuilding trust. It's rebuilding it by caring, and that's built on caring, and that's built on making sure we are mindful about the systems we build, how they're perceived on the other end. So it's an outside, we need to put ourselves on the outside looking in. That means we need leadership at the top who recognizes that and sets aggressive targets and says enough is enough. We're no longer fine. It's no longer good enough to be in the middle. We need to be the best. We're America, damn it. And we're going to be number one. Set it 5 years out or something, or at the end of the administration. But we absolutely need to focus on the provision of government to the citizens as a top priority of government. It's an existential need. And I see now, and we get this community together, we can really do this. If we all speak the same language, everyone is kind of on board, both sides of the aisle, everyone gets it. Now let's really focus in and get it done.
Thanks, Dom. I would hope the incoming administration would also look at what we've accomplished and the great things that the government has done over the past 8 years, that they actually got started when they were in here before, and the skills that have been, continued to be built over the last 8 years. So, and not throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? Like there's a lot of good stuff, and we hope that we can help them build onto this so that we can build these services to, change the lives of the American people. I would like to thank our esteemed panel today, Crystal, Lee, Amanda, Dominic, and Eris, for your contributions to the discussion. And Service to the Citizen Awards will open for nominations on the 22nd of January. servicetothecitizen.org. I'm marketing it today with my little sweatshirt here. So thank you again. And anybody who needs to go, we can stop the recording now, and we have the line for a little while if we want to keep it open.